I'm Tim Monroe, and this is what I really want to talk about. Everyone has a passion and a story to tell, something that lights them up. On this show, we talk to fascinating people about the things that really matter to them and to all of us. Sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's deep. Every time, we learn something new. It's what I really want to talk about. And if you want to be part of this ongoing conversation, let me know. My email is tsmonroe001@gmail.com. My guest today is Mike Savage. Mike joined WEKU, the NPR affiliate in this area, in 2018 as director and general manager. He's worked in public radio for more than 30 years, leading public stations in Georgia, Illinois, and Indiana. As WEKU's director and general manager, Mike oversees all station operations, including development, programming, and news. Mike serves on the Association of Kentucky Public Radio Stations board. He recently concluded 9 years of service on the NPR board of directors. While on the board, Mike served as the chair of the Distribution and Interconnection Committee. Mike is the only station manager to have been elected to the NPR board by station petition twice. Mike holds a master's degree in mass communication and a bachelor's degree in broadcast journalism, and has been honored with numerous journalism awards by the Society of Professional Journalists and the Associated Press. Mike has been named one of the best managers in radio by Radio Inc. magazine 5 times. 2024 and 25, Mike received the Kentucky Broadcasters Association's Broadcast Leadership Award for his leadership and innovation in the broadcast industry. Welcome, Mike. What do you really want to talk about today?
Well, thanks for the intro, Tim. And, you know, what's on my mind is the FCC. And
Okay.
That's what I really want to talk about. You know, most recently, people may have heard that the FCC is taking a look at ABC stations owned by Disney and Jimmy Kimmel's comments about President Trump and his wife. And the FCC is taking a look at these stations and doing something that they really have never done. They have asked Disney to not wait for normal television license renewal, but it's got to be done in 30 days. And they're going to take a look at essentially at content. They're speeding up the renewal process because of what Jimmy Kimmel said. And I'm really concerned because the FCC should not be involved in content. Their job is to regulate the industries, and they've really never put their thumb on the scale when it came to content, except going back into the 1970s when they came up with the indecency clause, which is sort of, you'll know it when you see it. But it was really to protect the public. It wasn't to take a political position or align, have the FCC align with a president or administration, and so that really concerns me. Our radio station, our license is coming due in 2028, and I have to wonder: is the FCC going to come after NPR stations and say, "Well, we don't like, your so-called biased commentary, and so we're gonna take a closer look at your license"? I just don't think that benefits the public, and that's what I want to talk about. That's what's got me worked up.
Let's dive right into that then.
Okay.
And I've been thinking about this because I've been having the same thoughts, and I generally agree with what in your point of view, but to just be devil's advocate for a second, right? In my opinion, probably a lot of people's opinion, Jimmy Kimmel's joke was funny, maybe, but it was also not. I mean, like, to sort of very publicly say someone's wife is waiting for their husband to die is a pretty, in my opinion, a dumb joke to make on the air, especially of the First Lady. It showed a lack of respect for the office. And again, I'm playing devil's advocate here. I'm not saying that that means the FCC should pull their license, but I am saying sort of what are the lines that, you should or shouldn't or can't cross?
I think your question is, should the FCC have the ability to regulate that sort of speech? And I think the answer is no. You can be offended by a host or somebody on the air, but you have the ability to go to thousands of different digital channels, analog channels, over-the-air radio and television, and find something else as a consumer that you like. And as a consumer, you're more than welcome to attend Disney shareholder meetings and voice your complaints. If you own that stock, if you don't own that stock, you can write letters to Disney and complain. You cannot listen to their product if you're really offended by that. But I think that's, the premise of our business is there are lots of different viewpoints. You may not agree with them. You may not like them. And if you get offended by something, you can dismiss it. But having the FCC say, well, the president is offended, we're offended, and we're going to take a look at your license. I think that's wrong.
Sure. I get that point. And then, Mike, sort of for people who might be really not be clear on all this. So the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, who do they have jurisdiction over? Sort of what outlets do they have jurisdiction over?
It's what's referred to from the 1934 Communications Act as the broadcast airwaves, the public's airwaves. So the free over-the-air service that people get on radio, FM radio, AM radio, and television, and over-the-air television. Mm-hmm. And there is some regulation of cable content, but that's really it. And so, TikTok is not regulated by the FCC, and Instagram is not. It's really the broadcast airwaves and what they deem to be in the public interest over-the-air free broadcast.
Right. So because Kimmel's on ABC, which is an over-the-air broadcast system, the FCC has jurisdiction, but they wouldn't have jurisdiction, say, over, this podcast or Joe Rogan or a lot of cable outlets where there might be all kinds of, partisan offensive speech one way or the other.
No, they wouldn't have jurisdiction in those areas, but they could, if they don't like your podcast, Tim, they could,
they might not like it after today.
they may enact a notice of rulemaking saying the FCC wants to, update the rules and and regulate podcasts and regulate digital channels and regulate. So they could move into that area. That would take years to do and require lots of effort, but they don't have any regulatory ability over your podcast.
Yeah. So what do you think is the appropriate role? I mean, what is the FCC supposed to do?
They're supposed to review licenses of radio and television stations and make sure they're operating in the public interest. Mm-hmm. So, for example, my station, like others, we have to keep what's called a public file, and this public file is listing. We do what they call an issues and programs report every 3 months, and this issues and programs report, we list the top 5 or so issues in our communities, broadly speaking, and then we write down exactly what we did during that quarter to address those issues and list all of the news stories that we produced and all of the public service content. And then that goes in the file. And anybody listening now could go online to the FCC online public file and click on WEKU and find all the programming we've done over the past 8 years, I think is what is up there. But that's what they regulate, and so we're required to keep this documentation. We're required to serve in the public interest and prove it, through this public file and through monitoring that the FCC does. So, for example, if somebody on a radio station was yelling obscenities and saying offensive things, a listener could file a complaint with the FCC. Then there could be, a hearing. They would document it, and they could pull the license. The FCC has pulled licenses of pirate radio stations or stations that didn't pay fees or didn't serve in the public interest. I think what we're getting at today with the sort of Disney issue is that we're moving away from a very basic function of sort of monitoring the broadcast media and moving into the we're a little concerned about the things you're saying.
Yeah.
And when the government starts to regulate what people say, then I think you're moving into less of a democratic state and more of an autocratic state.
Yeah, and is there any precedent for this? Like, over the years, I'm thinking, of course, like since late night TV shows have existed, they've been hotbeds for making fun of politicians, especially the president, whoever happens to be in office, and making jokes about them or their family or whatever. Is there any precedent of the FCC getting or even making comment about this before?
There has been with respect to the fairness doctrine and sort of bona fide news operations, and what the FCC is doing here is they're leaning on history and saying that folks like Colbert and Kimmel are not necessarily bona fide news operations, and what they're doing is subject to more scrutiny. And that's how they're trying to get around this, putting their thumb on the scale on content.
Yeah.
But in the 80s, you had the fairness doctrine, which required if you had one particular side on, you had to have another side on. It had to be as equal as possible. And it was just, very onerous back then to try to balance out the commentary. And you would get a lot of commentary on stations in order to balance out programming to meet this doctrine. That went away. But now we're sort of opening up this discussion about what Kimmel is doing and saying, well, that's not news, and because it's not news, then we can regulate it. And I think that's a slippery and dangerous slope. Yeah,
I agree, and I think that what the president is saying through the FCC is that what's in the public interest is what I think is in the public interest, but I think we all kind of understand that. That said, I also there's this sort of confluence of things that came together because this joke was made 2 days before the assassination attempt on the president, and Kimmel didn't know that was going to happen, but it's sort of conflated with that event. It just made it seem super offensive and insensitive, and there's no doubt in my mind that Kimmel wants to push that envelope. Like he's sort of eager to push. He's kind of making his, he's making his bones on poking the bear, essentially. And while I agree that the FCC shouldn't have anything to do with that, he's still poking the bear.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you could argue that the comments were made in poor taste and were offensive. And, I'm not going to judge what he said. I think that, it's a for-profit entity that has hired him, and he's getting paid to do that. And if the companies that are involved with Disney don't like that, they can talk to Disney in their corporate office and say, we have a problem. Maybe you went too far here. But I just don't think this is the area for the FCC to get involved with. We don't need in my opinion, we don't need the FCC to regulate what we say on our stations. It's our job to do that. And if Kimmel gets regulated or not regulated, if Kimmel gets in trouble with the FCC and Walt Disney says, okay, we're pulling you off the air because of this, and then the FCC says we're going to haul in anybody into our office that we don't like, that we deem we don't like, to review their license. As others have mentioned in sort of the 24-hour newscape on this, it takes a lot to put together the documentation to renew your license. It's very difficult. It takes months and months and months to do this 8-year process, and it's not something you can just magically snap your fingers and get all the documentation and do. And so this is an attempt by the FCC to apply pressure on Disney and also create a chilling effect on other companies to say, hey, if you don't want your station pulled in and required to resubmit early, because it costs, we have to pay attorneys to put this stuff together. It's not, station managers are not experts in areas of law and FCC law, and you need an attorney to help you do this. Yeah.
So let's pivot a little bit to that question about, so you've been how many years have you been station manager here?
Almost 8 years at WEK, yes.
And you were station manager other places before.
Other places. Yeah.
So you've got a lot of experience in this area, and I want to talk more about WEKU specifically. But so what is the so everyone, not everyone knows, but recently, not even that recently now, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting was eliminated by the Congress, meaning There's a huge chunk of funding that public media outlets no longer receive. And for you, I think it's a significant amount, as it is for almost every station. And so how does the FCC's sort of thinking or operations affect a place like WEKU?
Well, I think that the money that was that we lost from the federal government and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, that was almost $500,000 over 2 years. Mm-hmm. It was about $240,000 a year, but the rescission and the clawback took 2 years of advance funding back. So that was $500,000 that we were promised that we never saw and was a part of our budget, really for the past 60 years. So we counted on that to be able to broadcast in the public interest and not worry about broadcasting to the areas where we're generating the most donations or where the most people are. So that was the hurt from losing that federal funding. I think the FCC is coming at this from a different angle. It's and Brendan Carr, the chair of the FCC, has weighed in and said that public radio stations and TV stations should not be getting federal dollars, and that's really that was not his place to weigh in. That's not his jurisdiction, but they've weighed in on that, and what they're focused in on now is content that doesn't match with what the current administration likes. That's not harmonious with the current administration, and I think that can hurt public broadcasting because stations have to protect themselves from the FCC hauling them in and asking them to provide documentation on X, Y, and Z. And so as a station manager, not necessarily for me, but others could question, should we be covering X because I don't want to get in trouble with the FCC. And I think we need the freedom to be able to cover whatever we want. And if you disagree with us, that's fine. We don't expect you to agree. Change the channel. We understand that. But we need to be able to do our job.
So can you talk a little bit about, the WEKU, which is housed at Eastern Kentucky University in Richmond, just a few miles from here. It's an excellent public radio station. It really serves this area well, I think, in my opinion. So what are the challenges? I mean, regardless of the CPP funding or the FCC, whatever they're thinking, what for you have been the challenges of running a public radio, a public media outlet in this area? What are the challenges and what are the sort of rewards?
I think the challenge is there are many challenges. One in particular is that WEKU operates 10 stations in the state, not just one, and the 10 cover half of the state. We have stations in Maysville, stations in Middlesboro, the station in Richmond that serves Lexington. That's I would consider that our main signal, but we've got 10, and it's really hard to be able to cover half the state and do the kind of journalism that we want to do because we just don't have the resources. Right. We don't have the people. Yeah. We don't have the manpower. So that's a real challenge. Is how do you cover such a large geographic area and represent the population with very, very limited resources. I think the other challenges that we have, frankly, are recruiting. It's hard to recruit talent to Eastern Kentucky. We feel we pay our salaries that they're fair and they're market wage and reasonable, but we can't compete with Louisville and Nashville for talent. And I think that's another area where it is challenging. I think opportunities, with there are fewer and fewer news organizations doing news in Central and Eastern Kentucky, and you're getting a lot of repetitive content, and newspapers are they're not hiring more staff; they're shrinking, and so for us, I think the opportunity is to step into that role and serve areas that are getting less and less news, and be sort of the paper of record that newspapers used to be 20 and 30 years ago, and sort of fill that hole. But in order to do that, we've got to expand and grow and get bigger and hire more reporters. There's way more stories than we can cover as a news organization. Yeah. And so I would say that would be one of the big opportunities for us.
Yeah. And have you found opportunities to partner or collaborate with other outlets or other organizations? I'm particularly thinking of sort of in Eastern Kentucky, where, geographically everything is sort of isolated and spread out. And are there opportunities to collaborate with other folks?
Well, we currently collaborate with our partners in Kentucky through Kentucky Public Radio, which is made up of WEKU and then stations in Murray, Louisville, and Western Kentucky. And we also collaborate with partners in Tennessee and West Virginia through the Appalachian Mid-South Newsroom.
Okay.
And so those are larger collaborations. I think we don't have sort of a more localized collaboration in Eastern Kentucky because there's very little to collaborate out there. There
Right.
are some radio stations and newspapers, and we are working with some Eastern Kentucky newspapers to create the Appalachian News Exchange, which would then feed some content to some of our radio stations. So we are doing some limited collaboration down there, but we're collaborating where the resources are. And frankly, the resources are not in Eastern Kentucky.
Right. But the news is,
Yes.
that's the hard part, right? Things are happening, whether it's, we've had a lot of sort of difficult, catastrophic weather events in the last few years that have really impacted Eastern Kentucky. And obviously all the stories around economic opportunity, the opioid crisis and things like that. There's a ton of news going on. But I understand how it's really difficult to find people to go out there and gather it.
Yeah, it is, and we are. I mean, we're always trying to come up with ways to cover Eastern Kentucky, and we're working. We're having talks to try to get a grant to fund a bureau that would be based in Eastern Kentucky that would be made up of a couple of reporters and a managing editor. And I never put all my eggs in one basket, and you never know if you're going to get a grant. But we've pitched it, and we're trying to grow in that area. But one thing, Tim, about Eastern Kentucky that I noticed, and I'll admittedly, I am not from this area. Mm-hmm. I was born in Southern California. I've traveled all over the country and bounced around. Mm-hmm. That's what sort of what my life and career has been, and I've ended up here. But one thing I can tell you about Eastern Kentucky is that the national news media loves to do bad news stories about Eastern Kentucky.
Yes.
And what we want to do is, we want to tell the important stories, but we also want to tell the success stories. We also want to talk about, what it's like to be Appalachian and what it means to be in those communities. And I think there's an opportunity for us to do that, but I do get bothered, when I see national reporters coming down to cover, the flood of 2022, asking where the bodies are.
Right.
That bothers me because I don't think that the Appalachian culture in Eastern Kentucky is monolithic.
No.
And that impression has been painted by, the national media. And I'm not trying to beat down on anybody in particular. It's just, that's just the way it's been. And I think we're trying to change that narrative because we have staff who are from Eastern Kentucky that work for us, that live here. We're in the communities, and we may not be in every community, but we're trying to make those connections.
Yeah. And I think Mike, that there could be a lot of synergy with folks here at Berea College because there are a lot of Appalachian storytellers here, whether it's students who, born and raised in Eastern Kentucky, in a holler, some of our faculty, some of the people, and some people that I've interviewed, musicians and others who I've interviewed on this podcast who are very, very, very connected to Eastern Kentucky. So there's lots of stories, lots of opportunities for storytelling, I think, which, something we could look into. So talk a little bit. So one thing I've always been sort of curious about and wonder how you balance is, you're there, your sort of offices are in Richmond, 15, 20 minutes from Lexington, which is sort of a larger population center. But then you also want to serve the more rural areas in Eastern Kentucky. But the numbers are in Lexington, right? The people who, the ratings are going to get, the listeners are going to be in Lexington or surrounding areas. So how do you balance those demands?
Yeah, it's the nonprofit conundrum,
right?
Mission versus margin.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, we at our core, we are a service organization. And our goal is to figure out how to get the mission, how to get the margin in order to fund the mission. And I'll be honest with you, it's really challenging. I mean, 75% of the station's donors come from Lexington. Mm-hmm. And, it would be easy to say, let's just put all of our resources in Lexington because that's where the money is. Mm-hmm. But the reality is it's much more complicated than that. There are lots of people who live in Lexington, and Richmond and Berea who have connections to Eastern Kentucky. Mm-hmm. And so for us, what we try to do is we try to be as efficient as possible. We want to grow our organization from where the revenue is coming from. If the revenue is coming from Lexington, let's work to grow the revenue there, but to let our donors know that, just because our revenue is coming from Lexington doesn't mean that's all we're going to cover, that we want to be able to fund the entire operation, find out what's really important, and then go out and cover those stories. It's sort of like the news and classical music, dual stations. Mm-hmm. We run a classical music station. It's digital only. Mm-hmm. We generate very little money from that station, but our news operation generates the money to cover that, and that's a public service for us. We're not going to say, well, the classical stream is not making any money, so we're just going to shut it down. And that's where federal money came in, because federal money would subsidize our operation to be able to do these things. And now with that money gone, we have to find creative ways to subsidize our operation. I cannot go to the university and say we need more money because we don't, mm-hmm. we need more money because we want to do more. It's our responsibility to be really efficient. And we appreciate the university's support, but we're not going to ask them for more. We've got to be able to generate that money on our own and that increase on our own. And that's by producing engaging content where people can get stories and hear about Kentucky and hear about what's happening in our communities, where they're not going to hear it everywhere else, because you can turn on the TV, you can look at the newspaper, and everybody is covering the same University of Kentucky basketball story, and I think that's great. Mm-hmm. They can do that, but for us, our mission is different. We want to tell stories that are not being told, and it gives us a niche, Tim. I mean, people listen to us because they get something different, and we're proud of that.
And one thing you mentioned as we were sort of going back and forth on email about this conversation is the sort of different sorts of public radio licensees. Mm-hmm. And what role that plays. So what do you mean when you say that? What are the different sorts of stations?
Well, you could sort of identify them as like different shapes, triangles mm-hmm. and squares and circles, and the NPR system, and I'm just sort of focusing on NPR stations right now, are really made up of three different licensees. Like, who holds the license? Like, WEKU is the license is held by Eastern Kentucky University. They own it. So it's the university license. College University is one. There are some state licensees. So Georgia Public Broadcasting, South Carolina ETV, they are run by states. The state owns the license. And then there are community licensees, which Louisville Public Media would be an example of a community licensee, or WMMT in Whitesburg, where the community actually holds the license, and they've got a local board. And each licensee has their advantages and disadvantages. A university licensee has the benefit of having the backing of the university. So if they don't have to pay their bills immediately, there's a delay in paying the bills, and they've got the university providing HR administration, and they don't, generally don't have to pay rent and utilities at your office. A community licensee, they got to pay for everything. They got to pay for the building. They got to pay for HR. They got to pay for everything. And so there's a lot more, upfront costs for a community licensee. And then a state licensee, you've got the state bureaucracy. It's a state agency. And so they've got a lot of resources, but politics can get involved in a state agency. And so there are some high school licensees, or a few rare sort of oddball, but what's interesting to note in the NPR ecosystem, the majority of stations are university licensees. I think around 40 to 50%.
Yeah. And like you say, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but the university licensees, not in every case, but in a lot of cases, tend to be the larger stations. Does that make sense? Like, community licenses tend to be smaller stations with a smaller reach.
I would say not necessarily.
Okay.
No,
Yeah.
no. I because they're here in Kentucky, Louisville Public Media is a large community licensee, and then WMMT is a very, very small community licensee. But there are university stations I can think of. Abilene Christian University out there in Texas, they have a budget of a little under $400,000, very tiny.
Yeah.
And, to put it in perspective, our budget is about $1.5 million at WEKU. And then if you look at a station like in Boston, WBR, that's I think $15-20 million budget for that station at Boston. So it ranges the gamut for all licensees.
Yeah. And so, Mike, how did you wind up in public radio? I mean, was it something that you always knew you wanted to do, or usually it's a journey. So how'd you find your way there?
I stumbled on it as a college student.
Yeah.
I was going to Georgia State University, and I had an interest in broadcast communications, and they still have the station. At the time, they had one of the highest powered student run radio stations in the country, 100,000 watts, broadcasting.
Wow.
Broadcasting from Atlanta, and I wanted to get some experience there, and one of my advisors suggested that I intern at what was at the time called Peach State Public Radio, which is now Georgia Public Broadcasting. And said, and I said, well, I want to intern at the rock station, and back then it was called 96 Rock. It's like, I want to be at 96 Rock. And my advisor said, well, if you want to make copies and coffee, go for it. He said, if you want to actually do something, go here.
Yeah.
And so I became an intern at Peach State Public Radio. And my first assignment as an intern reporter was to go and cover the tropical storm. I believe it was Tropical Storm Alberto, would have been 1993 or 94 in South Georgia, where that whole area got flooded so bad that bodies were coming up from the cemetery and floating everywhere. Wow. And it was just an incredible disaster. And at the time, President Clinton came down to South Georgia to address the disaster. And so I went down with a reporter to cover that. And I had no idea what I was doing, and all the media were getting on two buses and different buses, and one bus was the White House pool, and the other bus was local media, and of course I went on the White House pool bus, and the CNN reporters were protecting me and saying no, he can come with us, and so I got to get all kinds of sound, natural sound, and interview people and create a story. And that was my exposure to NPR and public radio, and the sound that I got from that story went up and was aired on All Things Considered that week. And for me, it just opened up a whole other door. And it's so funny, Tim, how it mirrors today, because as a young kid in college, I was oblivious to public radio and this other sort of medium that was out there. For me, it was, it was commercial radio. It was commercial radio and TV. And that's, everybody in my class, very few people wanted to be in radio. They wanted to be TV anchors. That was the thing back then. Yeah. And today, you've got kids who are totally oblivious to not only public radio, but the news media in general.
Right.
And they're getting their news from TikTok and Facebook and AI. And so I see the similarities, but that road, led me to, getting jobs at various different places as a reporter and working my way up, and then becoming a station manager in Kankakee, Illinois, south of Chicago, at a radio station that they were so proud they had a sign on the highway on Interstate 57 that the radio station said, "Tune into 91.1 FM to find the best place to eat." And that was that was their big claim for that station. And I took that station and turned it into a real public radio station instead of a jukebox, and so things took off from there.
That's a great origin story. It's a good transition too, because I want to kind of broaden our lens a little bit. Lots of things have happened in the news and in the sort of media sphere over the last several years. But one of the things, and you mentioned this, was maybe the most shocking, is when CBS Radio News just went out of business, sort of suddenly. Or maybe not, but for me it was sudden. We're looking at this, we're looking out into the future, the landscape, and I'm wondering, what is the future of journalism, and what is the future of news reporting in this country or globally? I don't have an answer, but you must think about this all the time.
Yeah, I do. I'm very disappointed. And I think CBS is winding down their operation like third week in May. I think it's supposed to completely wind down. But, there's a real emphasis on the platform. And my sort of approach has been, to put the emphasis on the content and then let listeners decide on the platform, like create the really good content and then give them a menu and say, which platform do you want to pick this up on? And I think there's been a de-emphasis of the broadcast platform of radio, diminishing of it, that technology is changing. And because we have a cell phone, then therefore radio is not important anymore. And I think that's not entirely accurate, because not everybody in the country lives in a metropolitan city where you sit on a subway and you just listen to podcasts all day. People are in their cars, or they live in rural parts of Kentucky where they don't get internet, and they rely on over-the-air radio. So I think that radio still is a very viable industry. I think it's just got a marketing problem, and everybody else has caught up to radio and surpassed it in terms of marketing. And Howard Stern was on the radio for many years and is still very popular on the radio, but his podcast audience is growing. And so I don't have an answer to that question. I think the answer is create really good content, figure out what you're good at, and get it on all the platforms that people are going to listen. And at WEKU, we place an emphasis on listening on the app and listening on the stream, and many different ways to pick us up. But I am concerned that we don't have an answer to what's going to happen to broadcast radio as technology moves on. I think my position is make the content relevant and people will find you.
And other than just radio as a platform, and I agree with you, like good content is good on any platform, right? So, but what about the sort of future of journalism itself? I'm very worried about this. I think that, with AI and sort of the next generation, maybe not being able to be as critical in their thinking and decide this is a good source, this isn't a good source, and just sort of accepting what they're being fed through TikTok, like you said, or some kind of algorithm that just keeps giving them what they think they want, right? So what, and I know you don't have an answer to this either, but I think it's just a good thing to talk about for someone like you. What's going to happen there? Like, where might we, or is there any hope for sort of accurate reporting and journalism that helps make sense of the world continuing forward?
I think there is. I think that part of it really leans on our educational institutions. I think they need to do a better job, frankly, of training students to think critically, as opposed to checking off a box and moving them through college and without critical thinking skills, but really place an emphasis on journalism and sourcing and finding accurate information and being able to understand that. I've got an 18-year-old son, and he showed me an article the other day. I can't remember what it was, and he said, Dad, it must be true. It's from a .org website. And so I looked at him and I'm like, I don't know how to respond to that because I think that with the rise of AI and information that's being produced and you can't tell what's real and what's fake, I think our colleges and universities need to do a better job of saying, when you study, you need to critically think about everything. And instead of getting along with everybody, you need to question everything. That's what a good journalist does. It's our job to hold people to account and get credible information, as opposed to being the first to get information out there, or getting something that's going to get a lot of clicks and a lot of views so we can sell it and make money off of it. And I think it's really going to be up to our educational institutions to get to students and say, you need to make getting your information a priority, making sure that it's accurate. And journalism is really important because that's the institution that holds people to account in our country.
Yeah. And so to just kind of wrap this up a little bit, what do you think, here we are in Kentucky, we're kind of, I always describe this area as the sort of gateway to the Appalachia. Some people call it the bluegrass. And here we are in this sort of very interesting part of the country. You're running a radio station. You're running a public radio station. What role do you think you're going to continue to play, WEKU itself, in terms of promoting the value of reporting and journalism moving forward?
I think it's our job to really tell stories, sound rich stories, and have as many of them as we can, and produce as many of them as we can, and tell the stories of our community. It's not all about hard news and politics. I think it's finding the balance of getting that information out and also talking about arts and culture and just sort of common folk who live in this community and live in this state. And I think the more that we can tell stories of the people of this state, all different kinds of stories, and have somebody, listening on their phone or in their car, getting home and sitting in their driveway and going, wow, that's really interesting, and get them to think about this community, then I think we're doing our job. I think the future of the station is going to be, while others, fold and fall out of favor and don't make enough money to support their commercial operations, for us, it opens up an opportunity for us to tell more stories, have more people find us, especially younger people, and expose them to what's going on in their community. Yeah.
Thanks, Mike, so much for this conversation. And, full disclosure, I'm often on the air on WEKU helping you raise money because I'm a true believer in public radio and in the kind of journalism that you guys put out there. And I sort of urge anybody listening to, if you don't already listen to WEKU, you definitely should. And you definitely should support it because it's one of the few last bastions of independent journalism left, not just in this area, but, in the country. So, Mike, thank you for what you do, and thank you so much for this conversation.
Well, thanks, Tim. Thanks for having me on. It was a lot of fun.
Appreciate it. What I Really Want to Talk About is produced and recorded in the studios of Berea College News and Radio in Berea, Kentucky. You can learn more about this podcast and listen to all of the previous episodes at whatireallywantotalkabout.com. My contact information is on the website, so please get in touch with me if there's something that you really want to talk about. I'm Tim Monroe. Thanks for listening.